Hey there folks, the number one Alex Warren hater from the Infinite Jukebox here with another album review, and today I wanted to talk about this new Alex Warren record, You'll Be Alright, Kid. It feels strange, even downright incorrect, to say that Alex Warren's Ordinary is one of the most successful pop songs of recent memory. However, it is, objectively speaking, and based on chart status at least, true. Even after breaking the record for the most weeks an American artist has spent at number one on Billboard charts since Slim Whitman's Rosemary in 1955, and still being at number one on the US Hot 100 at the time of me writing and recording this review, Ordinary and the man behind it simply do not exist, to me at least. They feel like works of pure fiction. If Alex Warren did not have an easily accessible, publicly available, and known history on the internet as a influencer, as a former TikToker, member of the hilariously ill-fated Hype House, who of course produced the greatest TV show of all time, I would not be remotely convinced that he is a real human being. I truly do believe that he has this comically plain, brown hair, white guy kind of appearance, and a way that he just kind of pours the exact amount of passion you expect into his music from something that sounds like it's going to be played in Costco's around the entire United States in about 6 months' time, if it's not already being played there now. There's nothing about Alex Warren's music that suggests it wasn't made by AI in some sick joke being played on the mass public by the music industry to see how much sickly sweet adult contemporary drivel they can shove down our throats before we all collectively collapse and die from boredom. I mean, really, You'll Be Alright, Kid is the definition of an album that represents nothing except for one issue, which is that I can't help but feel it kind of represents everything awful about a very particular sound in popular music right now being produced predominantly by men. And I mean, it manages to create some issues of its own too that are somehow unique to it, making for one of the most unbearable mainstream albums of any genre I have heard in a minute. This made that Morgan Wallen album from earlier in the year feel like a cakewalk compared to listening to this several times for the sake of review. An understandably major talking point about Alex Warren's debut album is how vaguely Christian the whole thing sounds. I'm definitely not the first person on YouTube to point this out. Plenty of creators who are bigger and better than me, who have been doing this for longer, have made that a major talking point in relation to this song, and this is despite the fact that You'll Be Alright, Kid never musters up the guts to fully go in a wholly religious direction. This is an album that sees, Warren make his intentions clear overall in ensuring that this is in no question a record that will be consistently appealing to the ever-growing market of conservative young people, most frequently white straight men, within the mainstream. We've seen that happen with the sort of bro-country, neo-bro-country revivalist of recent years, and now in this record we see it in this schmaltzy, over-dramatic, very self-indulgent brand of lovey-dovey kind of pop. A sizable chunk of You'll Be Alright, Kid's track list, songs like Heaven Without You and The Outside, feature references to faith, to angels, and seeking help from unspecified forces that are so obviously meant to be references to religion and God that it feels physically painful to acknowledge the fact that he won't just go there because he knows that that has the slightest chance of alienating a very small portion of his audience. It's just so plain and so vague, and Warren is seemingly so unwilling to dig into that side of his music because it feels like the musical equivalent of him awkwardly shrugging his shoulders when an interviewer asks if he's a registered Republican or not. Like, I have no issue with this being a religious album or having religious symbolism, imagery in it. Plenty of great records do, but it just feels embarrassing at a point because it's apparent that that's the direction that he wants to go in, or at the very least, that's the feeling that he truly has inside while making this record, and that's great. That's fine, dandy even. But it just goes to show how this record is the most self-defeating album in a way. It's a record that really has no creative direction because Warren knows that he needs to put things in a very specific, formulaic formulaic structure of not going too far, but going just far enough to ensure that people who want this very dialed back, very conservative, very completely edgeless kind of brand of pop music, to make sure that it appeals to them and them specifically. And that is just depressing to hear. It just feels like the most monochromatic record possible because of that. And listen, I don't want this to be further misconstrued that this is all just some convoluted and masturbatory way for me to say that You'll Be Alright, Kid's a bad album because, ooh, it's religious, or it's very obvious that it has some very spiritual kind of religious leanings. That's not the case at all. That's not what I'm saying. Alex Warren has never been secretive regarding his Catholicism and various genres of music, ranging from more traditionally religious genres like gospel to genres at the opposite end of the spectrum like punk, have been filled with artists of various faiths that have contributed great works of art to their respective fields that you couldn't tell a history of certain genres without mentioning. You know, a lot of notable artists, I would say a massive, massive chunk of notable artists are Christian in particular. And what makes Warren's contribution to the world of music on his debut so pathetic by comparison is the way in which it is so obviously diluting itself so that it can reach mass appeal. This is an album that is never super spiritual or holy enough to just kind of get your average megachurch attendee to come crawling out of the corners of Kentucky to go hear it live at whatever local concert venue Warren may be performing at, but it is just as thematically traditionalist and conservative as you would expect in nature to appeal to that exact kind of audience. This isn't the music that's getting played at megachurches. This is the music that megachurch attendees listen to after they go home. And because of that, it's that constantly present kind of backdrop of vocals, backing vocals, and nearly every song's chorus that are reminiscent of a particularly forgettable gospel choir, while song topics bounce from one schleppy kind of ballad of unspecific love, because we don't want to get too detailed or else that might actually like piss a couple people off, and we would never want that, to kind of general perseverance in life overall. Again, these songs really have no detail whatsoever. It kind of follows the same songwriting sort of tropes that you expect from a lot of these men within mainstream pop music at this point in history. And that means that You'll Be Alright, Kid feels like the weakest excuse for pop music humanly possible in 2025. Again, at least within the mainstream. It's a record that is bafflingly vague, but in a calculated manner so that it may reflect itself into the lowest common denominator of Billboard Top 40 consumers out there, and it is just a drag to listen to. It helps or doesn't help, depending on which way you look at it, that Warren's vocals are absolutely terrible to boot. I mean, he has this sort of faux warble in his voice that's almost worth comparing to something like a fuckboy Louis Capaldi, if you will, but that would be insulting to the significantly more talented, boring 20-something white men of the music industry. There are equal amounts of sappy ballads with no real soul, like Who I Am, and upbeat cuts like Getaway Car and You Can't Stop This, that have so little energy that they make Imagine Dragons sound like Napalm Death in comparison. I swear to fucking God. It is no secret that the overdramatic vocal performances that only drag down already bland instrumentation have been something the genre of adult contemporary music has been dealing with and been criticized with for decades at this point, since its inception 50 plus years ago. But something about Warren's performance here just feels plasticky to an extent that someone like Sam Smith, or hell, even Peter Cetera, only wishes that they could achieve at the pinnacle of their respective degrees of boredom. I mean, this entire record is crawling with vocal performances that feel nothing short of disingenuous, backed up with these layers of corny, overblown pop rock production and pop folk kind of instrumentation that would have come across as obnoxious a full decade ago during the sort of stomping clap renaissance of the Lumineers, Philip Phillips, and Bastille, all artists that you should probably never take any inspiration of, considering there was a point where they represented the worst of mainstream pop music. But now in big 2025, Alex Warren is carrying that disgusting decrepit torch into the modern era. The reason that I say I have a hard time sort of properly comparing this record to any of the other sort of self-indulgent, sappy balladeers of the current era of popular music is because few as popular as Alex Warren feel as derivative as he does. I mean, say what you will about people like Benson Boone or Teddy Swims, and trust me, there is a lot to say about them. Benson Boone is not escaping my worst albums of the year list at the end of this year. Don't fret about that. But it is undeniable that they know how to perform, vocalize in a way that leaves them feeling distinct. Look, going back to Benson Boone, can't stand the guy's music, but I can definitely recognize beautiful things. I can definitely recognize mystical, magical. I can recognize him as a performer, as a person. The songs themselves may not be all that memorable, but the individuals performing them are, if not just for the fact that they may be kind of boring, even if that always isn't for the better, because you remember them because of how over the top they were, or because of how annoying they were, or even just because of how straight up bland they were, that it almost became kind of comical to you. Alex Warren can't even claim to have some sort of so annoying it's memorable kind of impact, and that's because You'll Be Alright Kid is almost fully reliant on pop tropes that feel wildly outdated. It's almost the sound that I just simply don't expect to hear at all in any capacity, mainstream or underground, in 2025. A massive portion of this record's track list is dedicated to this sort of folksy pop rock sound that reached its commercial peak in like the early to mid 2010s, thanks to artists such as those that I previously mentioned earlier just a couple minutes ago. And it is absolutely shameless in doing so, which is also something that baffles me, but it's just abusing that sound over and over so that Warren can try to drop one wannabe tearjerker after another and fail with the sort of relentlessness that you usually only see from artists trying to create their magnum opus. But you know, the funny thing about You'll Be Alright Kid is that it is evident, it is an evident truth that this is not, in fact, shocker here, what Warren intends to be the defining statement of his from an artistic standpoint. Alex Warren's debut LP blurs together from one track to the next with very, very little means of differentiation between these different songs. I mean, almost every song follows the exact same order of composition. It's a folksy pop singer-songwriter intro followed by a bridge that sees him increase the intensity of his vocal performance before a bombastic chorus that feels closer to a Joel Osteen sermon than it does actual music that you listen to or would hear in the wild. Now, stretch that sound out to like over an hour while throwing in the occasional up-tempo cut that feels just about as crazy as ordering dessert at an Olive Garden, and you've got the entire Alex Warren experience packaged right before you on a silver platter. It just feels so bloated. And with such a bloated runtime at hand, it almost feels insulting to the listener that Warren requests so much of your time to digest what feels like the same song about 21 times while he keeps chattering on about the same topics of how much he loves his wife, kind of almost similar to Chance the Rapper on The Big Day, but at least that album was memorable with how bad it was, or how he holds on to his faith still without actually further touching on that topic because, you know, God forbid that might actually alienate some of the boring suburbanite demographic that this record so painfully panders itself towards. And as someone who perhaps spends an unhealthy amount of my time listening to music, writing about music, talking about music, throwing my thoughts out onto the internet about music, I feel safe in saying that You'll Be Alright Kid makes me feel slightly less self-absorbed and insufferable somehow. It truly is a miracle. You'll Be Alright Kid accomplishes the impressive feat of showcasing just about everything that's wrong with a large chunk of particularly male pop stars within mainstream music in the current era of popular music, while also creating new annoyances that seemingly no other major act in pop music right now is providing to the world or demonstrating on a global scale in the same way that Alex Warren is. I mean, his vocals are beyond melodramatic. His songwriting is minimal and subpar at best, and that's me being kind. And the self-importance that this album conveys thanks to an extensive runtime and almost intentional, seemingly, lack of creative vision from one song to the next, everything blurring together like the most unpleasant days you've ever been in, it just makes the whole thing feel utterly baffling upon repeated listens. And the way that the whole affair sources used musical parts from a movement that was unwanted and quite frankly preachy both lyrically and sonically about a decade ago just makes the whole thing, the entirety of You'll Be Alright Kid, feel like one of the biggest mainstream disasters of the decade so far. The only thing that prevents it from coming across like a true definition career killer is because, quite frankly, Alex Warren likely doesn't have much ahead of him in the first place. A song like Ordinary is the kind of forgettable, stadium-ready trash that is destined to be a blip on the larger radar of popular music. The kind of song that is massive now in the moment, but in a year's time people vaguely remember, and in 10, 20, 30 years' time is a footnote that maybe a YouTuber will reference in a video talking about why there was so much boring shit that got to the top 20 on the Billboard charts in the United States and the UK throughout the 2020s. It's a song that is just not good, and put aside all the broken records, all the radio airplay, all you have left is a surefire failed debut from a pop star that has none of the qualities or qualifications that make a pop star memorable, as well as one of the most insufferable mainstream albums of the 2020s so far, just across all genres, period. I'm going to give this record a half a star out of 5. And with that being said, that is the end of this album review. Thank you for watching The Infinite Jukebox, and I'll see you in the next one.